Listen carefully, son. Don't be too much. Inner Steel, YouTube script. Cold open, first 3 seconds. You've been dimming yourself trying to fit. Shrinking your voice. Swallowing your opinions. Softening your edges. And they still don't respect you. Here's what nobody told you. The problem was never that you were too much. The problem is that you've been pouring yourself into people who were never built to hold you. This video is for the man who was told he cares too much, speaks too much, feels too much, wants too much, and believed it. Stay with me. What you're about to hear will change how you move for the rest of your life. And if this kind of raw, unfiltered stoic content is what you've been searching for, subscribe to Inner Steel right now. We're building men here, not followers. Intro. There's a quiet war being fought inside you right now. Not the kind with bullets or armies. The kind that happens in silence. At the dinner table when you choose not to speak, in the car ride home when you replay what you should have said, in the middle of the night when you stare at the ceiling wondering why the people around you make you feel like existing fully is a crime. Someone, maybe many someones, told you that you were too much. Too emotional. Too intense. Too ambitious. Too serious. Too loud. Too sensitive. Too focused. Too different. And somewhere along the way, you believed them. You started cutting yourself down. Editing your sentences before they left your mouth. Apologizing for your standards. Making yourself smaller at the table just so others could feel more comfortable in their seats. That ends today. Because the Stoics, the greatest philosophers of mental discipline this world has ever produced, had something very specific to say about a man who burns too bright for ordinary people to handle. They didn't call him a problem. They called him rare. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus. These men were not soft. They were not average. They were not comfortable to be around if you were living a small life. They challenged everyone in the room just by existing, and they were unapologetic about it. This is your permission to stop apologizing. This is your call to stop being too little in a world that already has enough of that. Here are 9 truths every man needs to hear, before the weight of other people's limitations crushes something in him that can never be rebuilt. Point 1. The man who is too much is usually too much for the wrong room. In 121 AD, a boy was born into the Roman Empire who would grow to become its emperor, its philosopher, and its conscience. Marcus Aurelius was not easy to be around if you were mediocre. He woke before dawn. He journaled with brutal honesty about his own failures. He held himself to standards that most men around him couldn't comprehend, let alone match. He asked hard questions in rooms that preferred comfortable silence. He expected depth in conversations that others kept deliberately shallow. The senators who surrounded him found him intense. The generals who reported to him found him difficult. The aristocrats who shared his world found him impossibly serious. And what did Marcus do with that feedback? He wrote in his private journal, what we now call Meditations. I have often wondered how it is that every man loves himself more than all the rest of men, but yet sets less value on his own opinion of himself than on the opinion of others. He saw exactly what was happening. The people who called him too much were people who had never demanded enough of themselves. Their discomfort with his fire was not a judgment on him, it was a confession about them. Here is the first truth you must carry. When someone tells you that you are too much, they are not giving you information about who you are. They are giving you information about what they can handle. The room that cannot hold you is not your room. A lion does not apologize for its roar simply because the rabbits find it disturbing. You are not too much. You are in the wrong place. And the Stoic response is not to become smaller, it is to find the arena that deserves your size. If this is already hitting different, subscribe to Inner Steel. This is exactly what we do here, strip the noise, get to the truth. Point 2. Overgiving is not a virtue. It's a wound wearing a cape. In the 1st century AD, there was a man who gave everything to everyone around him, and destroyed himself doing it. His name was Seneca. Now, Seneca was brilliant. A philosopher, a playwright, a statesman, an advisor to Emperor Nero. He wrote letters that still cut through 20 centuries of history like a blade. But there was a period in Seneca's life where he gave his time, his energy, his counsel, his loyalty, lavishly, endlessly, to people who had no intention of reciprocating. He watched lesser men rise on the strength of his advice. He watched his wisdom get stripped from context and used for purposes he never intended. He watched his proximity to power cost him peace of mind. And he wrote about it with a rawness that still stings. "It is not that I am brave enough to face death," Seneca wrote. "It is that I have wasted enough of life already on things that were not worth a single hour of it." He understood too late that overgiving was not generosity. It was a compulsion. A wound. A need to be needed because somewhere deep down, he feared that if he stopped pouring himself out for others, he would have no value left. Do you recognize that man? The one who gives and gives and gives, not because his cup overflows, but because he is terrified of what people will think of him if he stops. The one who bends over backward for people who wouldn't lift a finger for him, then lies awake at night quietly resentful of everyone he helped. That is not strength. That is self-erasure in a costume. The Stoics drew a hard line between genuine generosity, which flows from abundance and choice, and compulsive giving, which flows from fear and lack of self-worth. Genuine generosity says, "I have enough. Here, take some." Compulsive overgiving says, "Please love me. I'll prove I'm worth it." One is a man in his power. The other is a man running from himself. Son, stop being too much for people who give you too little. Your energy is a finite resource. Spend it like the emperor you were built to be, not like a servant desperate for approval. Point 3. Silence is not peace. Shrinking is not humility. Around 55 AD, a man born into slavery became one of the most powerful philosophical voices in the history of the world. His name was Epictetus. He was owned. Literally owned. His master, a cruel man named Epaphroditus, once twisted Epictetus's leg with his bare hands, slowly, deliberately, watching to see if the slave would beg. Epictetus did not flinch. He simply said calmly, "You are going to break it." And when his leg snapped, he said, "Did I not tell you?" Epictetus had no power over his body. He had no freedom of movement. No legal rights. No social standing. He had nothing, and yet he was freer than any man in that room, because he had mastered something no one could take from him. His mind. His response. His refusal to let external circumstances define his internal state. Now here is the critical lesson. Epictetus did not shrink. He did not make himself small to keep his master comfortable. He did not pretend to be less than he was to avoid conflict. He spoke the truth, quietly and without apology, even when the truth came with a price. And what he taught his students, men who came from across the empire to sit at his feet, was this. Never say about anything, "I have lost it, but I have returned it." He was talking about the things the world takes from us. But he was also pointing at something deeper, the sin of preemptively giving yourself away before anyone even asks. Too many men mistake silence for peace. They go quiet in rooms where they should speak, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are afraid of the reaction. They call it humility. They call it picking their battles. They call it being the bigger person. But Epictetus would call it something else. He would call it cowardice dressed in philosophical clothing. Real humility is not silence in the face of truth. Real humility is the ability to speak the truth without needing to win. There is a difference. One is a man who knows his worth and has nothing to prove. The other is a man who is hiding behind a virtue he is not actually practicing. Stop shrinking. Start choosing. There is a version of quiet that is powerful, and a version that is slow death. Know which one you're living. Point 4. The people who call you intense are living at the wrong frequency. In the late 1800s, a young Serbian-American inventor walked into Thomas Edison's lab with ideas that Edison couldn't fully comprehend. His name was Nikola Tesla. Tesla was, by every account, too much. He barely slept. He worked 18-hour days by choice. He could visualize entire machines in his mind before a single piece of metal was touched. He spoke about electricity the way a poet speaks about love, with fire and precision and an obsession that made ordinary men uncomfortable. Edison, who was brilliant in his own right, famously underestimated Tesla. He called Tesla's ideas impractical. He said the man was too theoretical, too obsessive, too consumed with visions that couldn't be monetized quickly enough. Tesla, unbothered, walked away. He found backers who could see what Edison couldn't. And he gave the world alternating current, the very electrical system that powers every home, every city, every screen you've ever looked at. The man who was, too much, lit up the entire planet. Now here's what you need to sit with. The people who call you intense, who say you think too deeply, care too much, work too hard, want too much from life, are operating at a frequency that simply cannot receive your signal. That is not a character flaw. That is physics. A radio tuned to one station cannot receive another. It doesn't mean the other station isn't broadcasting. It doesn't mean the music isn't real or worth hearing. It means the receiver isn't calibrated for it. You don't fix your music by turning down the volume. You find a receiver that was built for it. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." Stop measuring your intensity against the comfort level of people who decided to live small. Your frequency is not a malfunction. It is your frequency. Guard it. Point 5. Needing approval is the cage. Releasing it is the key. In 399 BC, one of the greatest minds in human history stood before a jury of 501 Athenian citizens and was condemned to death. His name was Socrates. He was charged with impiety and corrupting the youth, which, in plain language, meant he made people think, and thinking made the people in power uncomfortable. Here is what is extraordinary. Socrates had every opportunity to escape this verdict. His friends had arranged for him to flee Athens before the trial. And when the jury convicted him, they gave him the chance to propose an alternative punishment. He could have suggested exile. He could have promised to stop teaching. He could have humbled himself before the court and bought his life with a performance of submission. Instead, Socrates stood before those 501 men and said, essentially, "I cannot stop doing what I believe I was placed on this earth to do. If you let me live on the condition that I stop questioning, stop seeking, stop teaching, then I prefer death." And that is exactly what he got. Why tell you this story? Because Socrates understood something that most men spend their entire lives trying to figure out. The moment you make your behavior contingent on the approval of others, you have handed your freedom to a crowd. And a crowd will never give it back. Every time you edit yourself to make someone comfortable, you pay with a piece of your identity. Every time you hold back your opinion because you're afraid of the reaction, you practice a kind of dying. And every time you chase the approval of someone who was never going to give it anyway, you lose hours, days, years, of a life that could have been spent in the service of something real. The Stoics had a phrase for this, amor fati. Love of fate. It meant accepting fully what you are, what you were built to do, and what path you were meant to walk, regardless of whether the crowd applauds or condemns. Stop auditioning for people's approval. The role you were born to play was not written for an audience. It was written for you. Subscribe to Inner Steel if this is the kind of truth you need more of. We don't make content for people who want to be comfortable. We make it for men who want to be free. Point 6. Your standards are not your problem. People's inability to match them is. In the 1920s, a Japanese swordsmith named Miyamoto Musashi, who had already fought over 60 duels and never lost a single one, retired from combat and began writing a book. The Book of Five Rings. It is not a book about swords. It is a book about mastery. And in it, Musashi writes something that should be tattooed on the inside of every man's mind who has ever been told he was too demanding, too high maintenance, too hard to please. Do not waste time idling or thinking after you have set your heart on a particular path. Musashi held himself to a standard that was nearly inhuman. He woke before dawn every day. He practiced the same cuts 10,000 times until they were perfect. He refused to eat with other swordsmen because he found their complacency contagious. He lived alone, thought deeply, and gave his entire life to the relentless pursuit of excellence. Did people find him difficult? Absolutely. Did he care? Not even slightly. Because Musashi understood what most people never learn: standards are not demands placed on others, they are commitments made to yourself. And when you lower your standards to make another person comfortable, you are not being generous. You are committing a slow act of self-betrayal. Here is the hard truth: high standards men make low standards people deeply uncomfortable. Not because there is anything wrong with the high standards man, but because his very existence is an indictment of the choices they have made. When you choose discipline, it silently judges their indulgence. When you choose excellence, it quietly exposes their mediocrity. And rather than rise to meet you, some people will simply try to pull you down. They will call your discipline obsessive. They will call your ambition arrogance. They will call your refusal to settle unrealistic. They will tell you to relax, to enjoy life, to stop being so serious. What they mean is, stop making me feel bad about who I chose to be. Don't lower the bar. Raise it higher. And let the people who cannot meet you there find their own level. Point 7. Feeling deeply is not weakness. It is the mark of a man who is fully alive. In 1945, a neurologist and psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl was liberated from Auschwitz. He had lost his wife, his mother, his brother. He had been stripped of everything a human being can be stripped of. He had watched men around him die, not just from cold and starvation, but from the loss of meaning. The moment a man could no longer find a reason to endure, Frankl wrote, he would be dead within days, regardless of his physical condition. But Frankl himself did not die. And when he emerged from the camps, gaunt and broken in body but unbroken in spirit, he wrote one of the most important books in the history of human psychology, Man's Search for Meaning. In it he wrote, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. But here is what people miss in that book. Frankl did not survive by becoming cold. He did not survive by shutting off his emotions, by becoming numb, by refusing to feel. He survived by feeling everything fully, the grief, the love, the hope, the terror, and choosing what to do with those feelings. He writes about thinking of his wife, not knowing whether she was alive or dead, and choosing to hold on to the love rather than the uncertainty. He writes about moments of beauty in that hell, a sunset visible through a crack in the barracks, a joke shared between prisoners in whispered tones, and choosing to be present to them. The man who feels deeply is not weak. He is paying attention. He is alive in a way that the emotionally armored shut down. Don't let anything touch me. Man is not. The Stoics were not men who felt nothing. They were men who felt everything and then chose their response. There is an enormous difference. If you are a man who cares deeply about your purpose, about the people you love, about the quality of your life and your work, that is not a problem to be fixed. That is the signal that you are still fully human. Guard it. Don't let anyone convince you to trade your capacity to feel for a performance of toughness that is really just numbness with better branding. Point 8. The version of you that fits perfectly was built for a smaller life. In 1955, a woman named Rosa Parks sat down on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and refused to give up her seat. What most people don't know is that Rosa Parks was not a spontaneous act of defiance. Rosa Parks was a trained activist, a meticulous thinker, and a woman who had spent years attending to injustice with her eyes wide open while everyone around her told her to lower her expectations. "It is not my fault if people don't want to be bothered," she once said. "The only tired I was tired of giving in." She had been told her whole life that she was too much. Too outspoken. Too unwilling to accept the way things were. Too idealistic. Too stubborn. And on that December evening, she decided that being too much was exactly right. The version of Rosa Parks that fit perfectly into what the world expected of her would have stood up, moved to the back, and been forgotten by history. The version that refused to fit, the version that insisted on occupying the full space of her humanity, changed the course of a nation. Now bring this down to your life. Think about the version of you that would make everyone comfortable. The version that doesn't ask for too much, doesn't dream too big, doesn't speak too plainly, doesn't push back too hard. The version that quietly accepts less than he deserves because making waves feels too costly. That version of you is safe. That version of you is acceptable. That version of you will live a perfectly quiet, perfectly forgettable life. And then there is the version that refuses to shrink. The version that says, "This is who I am. These are my standards. This is what I was built to become. I will not negotiate my identity for the comfort of people who are never going to celebrate me anyway." That version of you is too much for small rooms, small minds, and small lives. And that version is the only one worth building. The man who fits perfectly everywhere is the man who stands for nothing and becomes nothing. Don't be that man. Inner steel exists for the man who refuses to shrink. If you're still watching, you already know which version of yourself you're choosing. Subscribe and join the brotherhood. Point 9. The world does not need less of you. It needs more of the right you. In 1962, a young preacher stood at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and delivered a speech that would be remembered for as long as human beings have memory. But what most people don't know is that Martin Luther King Jr. was told, repeatedly, by people on his own side, that he was too radical, too uncompromising, too urgent, too angry, too divisive. The very people who should have supported him wrote letters urging him to slow down, to soften his message, to stop pushing so hard, to wait for a better moment. His response came from a jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama. The letter from Birmingham jail is one of the most devastating pieces of prose ever written in the English language. And in it, King addressed the people who told him to wait, to tone it down, to be less. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed. He would not be quieted. He would not be softened. He would not be made smaller for the convenience of people who were not willing to pay the price he was paying. And the world changed because of it. Now, here is how this lands for you, not as a political statement, but as a truth about identity and purpose. The world does not need the muted, edited, shrunken version of you. It doesn't need the version of you that finally figured out how to be comfortable for everyone. That version helps no one. It inspires no one. It builds nothing that lasts. The world needs the version of you that got so clear on who he is and what he was built for that the opinions of small people simply stopped registering. Not arrogance. Clarity. Not indifference. Certainty. Not aggression. Presence. There is a man inside you who has been waiting, quietly, patiently, behind the wall of other people's expectations, for permission to step fully into his life. I am not giving you permission. I am telling you that you never needed it. You are not too much. You are exactly what is required. The question is, will you finally let yourself be it? Close. Let me bring this home. You have spent too long apologizing for being the kind of man who actually shows up, fully, completely, without delusion. You have spent too long letting people who chose comfortable mediocrity become the measuring stick for your life. You have spent too long asking, "What's wrong with me?" when the real question has always been, "What's wrong with this room?" Marcus Aurelius didn't shrink. Epictetus didn't break. Seneca didn't stop writing. Tesla didn't stop inventing. Frankl didn't stop feeling. Rosa Parks didn't stand up. King didn't slow down. And neither should you. The Stoics had a word, virtus. It meant excellence. Strength. The full expression of a human being living at the highest level they are capable of. It was not a soft word. It was not a comfortable word. It was a word that demanded everything you had. That is what inner steel is built on. Not comfort. Not easy answers. Not content that tells you what you want to hear. We tell you what you need to hear, so that the man you are capable of becoming actually gets built, instead of buried under the weight of other people's limitations. If this video found you at the right moment, don't let the moment pass. Subscribe to Inner Steel. Share this with the man in your life who has been made to feel like he's too much. Leave a comment below and tell me, what's one thing you've been holding back that it's time to stop apologizing for? Because the world doesn't need less of you, son. It needs you at full power. Now go. End card. Subscribe to Inner Steel for more stoic philosophy, mental toughness, and the kind of truth that builds real men, not just good-sounding ones. Every single week. Right here. We'll see you in the next one.